Hi, everyone. We'll just all get situated first. I took the shortcut. Bring up my notes here. So for those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Gloriana Trujillo. I am the Director of Academic Teaching Programs at the Center for Teaching and Learning. I use she, her pronouns. And so our session is titled Multi-Institutional Perspectives on Ideal Engagement, Well-Being, and Belonging. And first, just a brief overview of what we'll do for the next hour-ish. We're going to have introductions from the panelists. I'll have a few prepared questions, and then we'd really like for the audience to engage with questions, and we'll have a way to do that. But before the panelists introduce themselves, we want to know who's in the audience so that they can do a better job of customizing their responses. So if you would please join the conversation at polev.com/Gloriana. We have a question there that's asking how you describe your role when you introduce yourself. Are you a trainee, like a graduate student or postdoctoral researcher? Staff that supports teaching and learning, an instructor, be that faculty, lecturer, or academic teaching staff, administrator who helps with decision making in teaching and learning, an additional role not described, and then we knew we had guests at Stanford and from elsewhere, so we're curious how many folks are here from beyond Stanford. I see the responses coming in. I'll just give you a few more seconds to respond to that. And do keep your poll open because this is how we are going to accept questions from the audience. All right, so let's have a look. I see a few more coming in. All right, so predominantly about 27% responded staff supporting teaching and learning. We have 20% who are instructors, 14% trainees, and administrator keeps growing. The numbers are sort of changing still. Looks like, okay, so the way that it's doing the numbers, 20% are Stanford and 10% another institution, not Stanford. So just to give you a sense of who's in the room. And you can continue to add your responses just for another minute. And then I'm going to lock this poll. Actually, just another 5 seconds, sorry. So that we can move on to the next poll, which is what questions you have for the panelists. So this will stay open. Anytime a question comes up, I'll be monitoring it, and we'll find time in the between responses to ask the questions, and also there's designated time for that. All right, so I'm delighted to have this panel of speakers representing different institutional perspectives and their experiences engaging with IDEAL. And for those of you from beyond Stanford, IDEAL stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access in a Learning Environment. How these institutions or experiences have engaged with IDEAL ideas, as well as the concepts of well-being and belonging. Mary, would you please start by introducing yourself? And I have each of your names. Where are they? There they are. Would you please start by introducing yourself and share a bit about your role at Brown as well as with the Boyer Commission?
Thank you. How is the volume?
Great.
Well, I'm so pleased to be here today. And let me first say that you are so lucky to be working with the center on campus. It's extraordinarily well known and impactful across the country. And as a member of the Ivy Plus Center for Teaching and Learning Consortium, we've certainly benefited from the wisdom and hospitality of the campus. So thank you for that. So my name is Mary Wright. I wear 3 hats at Brown University. I'm Associate Provost for Teaching and Learning. I'm also a Professor of Practice of Sociology, so my disciplinary training is in sociology. And then the biggest hat that I wear, though, is I am Executive Director of the Sheridan Center for Teaching and Learning, which is a large, what I call intergenerational and integrative center for teaching and learning. And by intergenerational, I mean that we serve faculty, staff, postdocs, and students, so all campus constituencies in our work. And by integrative, I mean that we also not only focus on teaching and learning, but also student success, assessment, and digital learning and design. So I'm going to speak today about my role. One more? Yeah. Okay. On the Boyer 2030 report, which is the frame for this panel. It is a reference. There are two famous Boyer reports. One that may be familiar to many people in this room is Scholarship Reconsidered. This one is a reference, though, to the 1998 Boyer report on reinventing undergraduate education. That report called for a radical reconstruction of undergraduate education. And I'm not sure that we actually got there, but because of the report, I do think we have seen an increase in many of what we now call high impact practices. So things like the rise of first year seminars and the rise of undergraduate research experiences. So certainly a very influential report. I was a graduate student at the time, and I remember being pretty wowed by thinking about the ideas presented in the report. So fast forward to 2021, I was invited to participate in a commission that was co-chaired by Peter McPherson, which is the head of the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, and Barbara Schneider, who is the head of AAU. And there were altogether 16 commissioners, one of whom was Claude Steele from Stanford as well. And we met over the course of a year. Wonderful, provocative discussions. We had information sessions from over 30 experts from HBCUs, HSIs, PWIs. We also drew upon the literature as well as a national survey of undergraduate vice provosts and presidents. And so the foundational premise of the report is in the title, what we call the equity excellence imperative. And I believe that was language drawn directly from what several undergraduate vice provosts talked about in the responses to the survey. The idea being, rather than seeing those as oppositional aims, that we should sacrifice one for the other, how can we frame this as seeing them as inextricably intertwined? And then with that overarching goal, we established 11 provocations, or questions really, that we said that research universities needed to engage in order to reach the aim of the excellence equity imperative. And we set an ambitious timeline of 2030 to do that. And so I'm listing these here. On the first slide, there was also a QR code to access the report. The first one topic was world readiness, which is a term from Kathy Davidson to say that our role is not only to prepare students for work, but also citizenship and life. The second one, freedom of speech and expression, a pretty capacious topic that we spent just a couple of pages on. The third that I think we'll probably talk a lot about today is access to high impact practices. So not only thinking about creating high impact practices, but also what I call high impact pathways. So equitable opportunity to these practices. The fourth is teaching and thinking about how to further encourage the full use of evidence-based pedagogies, and also to think about the role that not only individual instructors play, but the accountability for departments and other organizational units. Advising was the fifth topic. Faculty rewards and recognition structures. We also had several questions about access and affordability. Curricular pathways focused on using curricular analytics to think about the pathways that our students go and the institutions that they go between and making those pathways more rational. 9 was digital technology, and 10 was mental health and well-being. And then the final piece talked about how do we know that we've gotten there? What are the metrics by which we'll know that we have been successful in 2030? So the last thing I'll say before turning it over that I appreciated that the report did is that one of the books I've really found very influential for my thinking that came out in 2020, so I think it kind of got lost during the pandemic, was Jonathan Zimmerman's Amateur Hour, which is a history of college teaching. And in that book, Jonathan Zimmerman talks about, in some sense, since the foundation of our academy in the US, we've had this narrative that everything's terrible, that students are terrible, that teaching is terrible. And that has been quite a static narrative. And so I think what we try to do in this report is say, yes, there's an imperative to change, but we're not doing ourselves any favor to say that no one uses active learning or that centers for teaching and learning do a terrible job. I think it does an accurate job of saying, here's where we are and what we're doing well, and then here are some growth areas that we need to pay attention to. So I look forward to talking more about the report and hearing from the other panelists' ideas too. So thank you, Gloriana.
Thank you, Mary. Sarah, please introduce yourself.
Well, it's lovely to see everyone. Oh, I forgot to turn my microphone. Amateur hour indeed. There we go. So it's lovely to see you all, and I'm really pleased to have been invited to be on this panel and to be a part of the TEACH conference, which is such an important part now of the teaching and learning ecosystem at Stanford. So I'm Sarah Church. I'm the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education. I'm also a faculty member in the physics department. And I have the very great privilege of having CTL as part of my portfolio, our Center for Teaching and Learning as part of my portfolio, as well as a large number of other units that are connected to first-year writing, the first-year seminars we heard about, our first-year requirement, which we call college, the civic, liberal, and global education set of courses, overseas studies, academic advising, undergraduate research. I'm probably forgetting something, but you get the idea that we have a lot of programs that are aimed at really helping students succeed at Stanford and to find these high impact practices. So I've been working on priorities. This is actually my third year. I'm ending my third year as Vice Provost. And so that means, of course, I started during the pandemic. And so a lot of the first few years were pandemic related. And so really it's now that I'm starting to have a chance to think about priorities. And so our priorities in the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education going forward, are in three buckets. The first is equalizing access and opportunity. The second is encouraging academic well-being. And the third is revitalizing the residential liberal education. And I'll just talk about things that are related to the first two. So I did want to say, though, before I get to that, which is, it was very interesting. It's obviously interesting to hear about this report. I just want to say a quick word about our Center for Teaching and Learning and how I've seen that change, because I've been here for nearly 25 years. I think that, boy, did the pandemic really catapult our Center for Teaching and Learning into the spotlight. And I'm sure that's true at other institutions as well. And I think we're really in a moment now where we have the attention, we have the eyes of faculty and instructors, because they knew that they didn't know how to teach remotely, or most of them didn't know how to teach remotely. And I think for a lot of them, when they started teaching remotely and getting help from the Center for Teaching and Learning, they discovered, wow, there are different ways to teach my classes. And so I am very aware of this moment. The second thing that I think is really important and that guides the way I think about my priorities of equalizing access and opportunity and encouraging academic well-being is that sometimes we talk about things like access and opportunity in terms of specific groups of students. And what I've learned over the years is that if you look at a problem that you're seeing show up in a particular group of students, and I'm going to talk a bit about first-generation low-income students, actually, what you do when you make that situation better for them is you make it better for all the students. They're just the groups that are most affected by something that we're not doing right. So that includes first generation low income students who may have not had access to AP courses. That's something we're dealing with at Stanford. But also I was having a conversation a couple of days ago with our faculty representative for student athletes. And one of the issues our student athletes have is when they're in season, it's hard to take a large class load. And at Stanford, we tend to teach, a lot of courses we teach once a year. So students can't find their course. But you know what? We also have students who take who take leaves. They take medical leave. They may need to go home to be with a family member. And if we only teach a course once a year, they're in the same situation as the athletes. So I'm sort of really turning my way of thinking about this is if we can improve equity and access in our courses with a particular group in mind, we're going to improve it for everyone. And so I think that's a helpful way to talk about it to some of our colleagues who might feel that, well, you know, why are we paying so much attention? Or unfortunately, sometimes we hear, well, maybe these students shouldn't be here, which of course is totally wrong. So we have a number of initiatives going on at the moment. I won't say too much about the improving academic well-being, although it's really important because our students can't learn if they don't feel good, if they're overwhelmed by stress or other things that are going on. But what I will just talk about briefly is one initiative we have that's actually part of IDEAL under the Equalizing Access and Opportunity. And that is something that we call leveling the learning landscape. And it's really focused on first-generation low-income students and helping them to transition to Stanford. I was a first-generation student myself, so I remember what it felt like to get to an institution and not have a clue how it worked, and sort of feeling that everyone knew their way around except me. So we're focusing on the first 2 years for these students to make sure that, so why 2 years? It's because students tend to declare at the end of their second year. So we focus on the first 2 years to make sure that that these students are off to a great start, they feel supported, and then they're ready to declare. So we have 3 pieces. We are taking a good look at our pre-matriculation courses. I'm sure other institutions have these as well. Those are incredibly important for community building. We bring the students in for 4 weeks. They get to build community, they get to sample research. We're adding a first year to sophomore program, so what we call the sophomore summer program for rising sophomores. That's going to give students an opportunity to do a 4-week research project and a 4-week internship, what we're calling a micro-internship, and take a course as well. So that students so that we're lowering the barrier for students to participate in those kinds of activities. But the third thing, and I'm excited about all of it, but this is particularly exciting for the reasons I mentioned up front, is we are also launching CTL, not me, I shouldn't say we. Center for Teaching and Learning is launching a Curriculum Transformation Institute to work with departments to think about their first year courses, particularly courses that are prerequisites for other courses, and make sure that every student has a pathway that meets them where they are in their preparation. And if we can pull that off and get faculty to think hard about these things, some of whom may be in the audience today, then that's a perfect example of how we improve things for one group of students, but actually it's going to benefit an enormous number of students. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Sarah. And that's an excellent segue to Denise. Please introduce yourself, Denise.
Thanks. Can you all hear me? Yeah. I'm Denise Galarza Sepúlveda. I am the director of the Foundational Course Initiative at the Center for Research on Learning and Teaching at the University of Michigan. I think that our center functions a little bit more traditionally in that we do not focus as much on undergrads. We work with faculty, we work with graduate students. We do have that same experience of being much more in the limelight now with all of the things that happened during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And so we have a lot of efforts and more connections with leadership to think about just-in-time supports, whether that's in blogs or workshops, seminars for faculty to get some collective thinking around issues like free speech, emerging technologies, and these kinds of things. I'm going to talk more from a perspective of a particular initiative that I direct in our center, which is the Foundational Course Initiative, and it is focused on intro courses. When I was in college, they were called soul crusher courses, but they can also be called filter courses, right? And there are a few other terms for them, right? Filter because they tend to filter out, right, the students who can't cut it, right? And this is the kind of traditional view of those massive introductory courses. So the Foundational Course Initiative, and I'll refer to it as FCI, grew out of this recognition that these courses play an outsized role in students' careers, right? They can make or break a student's career path, right? And they can often be the only introduction to a discipline, right? And so what we want is for them, as Sarah pointed out, to kind of explore those first 2 years are so crucial. And if the first message is you can't cut it, right? That creates something of a ripple effect throughout their whole career. So there's a recognition that they are really important, that they're very difficult to teach, and so that faculty, even with the best intentions, with the best kind of preparation and the most seasoned faculty, have a hard time. These are sometimes between 100, and when we say large courses, we mean 120 to over 1,000 students in a class, right? So it is large. And so there are difficulties. There are management challenges for instructional teams. There's coordination. There is just the plain old logistics of teaching the course. And so we recognize that it required a lot of support. So this initiative takes a few kind of unique approaches to that. One is that instead of working with an individual faculty member on their course, we work with course teams. And where there don't exist teams, we create them. So we also insist that they are cross-role teams. So it's undergrads, graduate students, the instructors, sometimes advisors or staff who have a real role in the course, and depending on the department, that may or may not be the case. And then 2 of our consultants partner. The other thing that's unique is that it's a 3-year process, and that allows for a lot of experimentation. It also allows, how should I say this delicately, sometimes you need to pull the course from the grips of someone who's had it for decades and to bring it to a different place. A loving grip, but a grip nonetheless, right? And so sometimes that needs to happen, and that requires time. It's a culture shift. And so we partner for 3 years, including the summers. So it's really labor intensive. We also make sure that it is a partnership with the department, so that we think of this as not just diversity, equity, and inclusion, but a justice initiative. It's justice for the faculty also. So we want to make sure that they're supported. And so we have a memorandum of understanding that we create. I have copious meetings with leadership and with faculty. What would you need to have a little bit more time in order to do this thing? And so it's a lot of back and forth, as you can imagine, to say, can they step away from this service? Can they do this? Can you lighten their advising? Right. And so there's that groundwork I do as the director, and it's really important. It is taxing, but it's important, because by the end, when everyone signs on the MOU, there's a sense that yes, there is a recognition about the person's capacity and what they're going to be doing, and the kind of DEI contribution that they'll be making to the entire campus. There's also recognition, and I'll mention this because this is sometimes a concern, about the J-curve, right? The natural dip that sometimes happens when you introduce something new, and students might be a little worried or unsure, and that might show up in evaluations. We protect instructors from any repercussions about that for those 3 years and beyond for this course, because it is a recognition of the experimentation that's happening. And then I think another element is that we do look at the course in terms of learning and instructional technologies. How could that help us? How can we promote a student's sense of belonging? And also think about how to use learning analytics, which is just the big data at the university, or also just what are what's the data around? What are the data around a particular exam, even, right? What are we trying to do? And every intervention we do formative assessment. So it's a high labor effort, but we've had 100% kind of continuity with courses that have finished their 3 years with us and have continued with the newly designed course, and also with some of the elements that we've put in place for them to continue evolving the course in ways that are equity focused. I mentioned data. I'll mention one other detail, which is we create equity reports of the courses that we work with at the very start. That report has kind of an x-ray of the course for the last decade, sometimes decade and a half. This is where students, the first part of it is a little bit more descriptive. So this is where students come from, where they go, the courses they take while they're taking your course in these last 10 years, right? But then there's really the equity part of and really where the most impactful part of the report is that we're able to say, is this a course penalty course, or is this a grade penalty course or grade boost course? In and of itself, those are not important markers, except for when you look closer at the data and you disaggregate the data. Is it a grade penalty course for everyone, or is it just for certain populations, right? And that's where we get into the equity piece. Buy-in is huge for this kind of thing because it's a lot of work. But once you see that, you cannot unsee that. Even if you've gotten teaching awards, even if you know high evaluation scores, if you see that you're not really reaching a population year after year after year, that is really compelling. And so that's another piece of our work. We also, I'm going to say just one more thing, which is well-being, of course, emerged. And so thinking about the ideal framework, well-being emerged as something that was and continues to be really important. So we're doing some work around that, and I'm happy to share some thoughts. We also very explicitly, and this happened more right at the start of the pandemic and with all the climate, political climate and the social climate of the time, we thought it was really important to lean in on the J of the DEIJ. And so we start with very explicit conversations with our partnering faculty about what are systemic inequities? How do they show up in our society? How do they show up in higher ed? How do they show up at the University of Michigan? And so we kind of have this very focused conversation. That's an explicit conversation for the whole team, undergrads, grads, and instructors on what we call the CCD, Collaborative Course Design team. And that's really eye-opening for many faculty, and it's something to grapple with at the very start of our partnership. But what we do is we normalize that we all have to do what I call, and I tell my team, this is my view of it, is you have to do some personal archaeology. You have to kind of dig up your own assumptions, your own calcified thoughts about things, and you have to do that and kind of be honest about that. And so the 3 years allows us to build those real trusting relationships, to be able to say, have folks be honest about like, well, I don't understand why this, and then we can help them understand why it's important, right? And so that honesty can't happen until you really talk about inequities and how they show up in the classroom. So I'm gonna stop there, but I'm happy to pick up any of the threads that you'd like to.
Thank you, Denise. Thanks to all the panelists for your introductions. My first question is based on the equity excellence imperative. So efforts at multiple institutions are underway to support student mental health and well-being. And the equity excellence imperative report asks, how can we urgently support belonging and well-being in our university communities? So how are each of your respective campuses, or Mary, you can speak from the report perspective and feedback you're hearing there, or initiatives acting on this question, either as belonging and well-being pertain to students or faculty and staff and instructors, different aspects of the community? Whoever would like to begin.
Oh, okay. So I think this is, some of it I've touched on a little bit, which is I think making sure that the courses, that a student feels they can be successful in a course if they work hard and they don't feel that there's some barrier. That's really important. At Stanford, obviously, as it is in so many places, student mental health and well-being is a huge concern. So there's in addition to building up the cadre of mental health professionals and well-being coaches, we're also thinking about academic well-being, specifically in VPUE, because we are this is the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, so I'm thinking about academic well-being from an educational perspective. So some of the things that we know can increase belonging. There are small things. There's faculty just talking to students, meeting with students, making sure that a student knows that an instructor, a lecturer, a faculty member is there and willing to talk to them. We're supporting faculty, lecturers and instructors when difficult circumstances arise and they need to have a conversation with the class. But also we're having conversations with them about how their assessment practices in particular can influence student well-being. One of the things we're just starting, I'm doing this jointly with our committee our faculty committee on undergraduate standards and policies, is we're looking at grading in the first year to see what role grading plays, to see whether we should be considering practices that some of our peers have, which is to let students know what grade they got, but not show it on the transcript. That way, if there's a grade penalty, and I should say when there's a grade penalty, because there are courses with grade penalties, a student who arrives and finds that a course is not meeting them quite where they are, and who suffers a grade penalty as a result, that doesn't show on their first year transcript. We know that for all our students as they go through, as you get towards the end of a career, there's the GPA differences between groups virtually vanish. So we don't want to penalize students in the first year. And grades is something that I hear a lot about as a source of stress. So it's things like that, but it's also inclusive teaching practices, which the Center for Teaching and Learning has been working on, and trying to let students know that faculty are here, we're people, trying to find ways for faculty and students, lecturers and students, instructors and students to connect outside class in low stakes environment, just so that students know that struggle is normal. We're here to help support you through it.
Sarah, quick follow-up. I know about Dr. Shashank Joshi's position, so could you mention a bit about that as well?
Yeah, so we're lucky in VPUE to have Shashank Joshi, who's a professor of I always have trouble off the top of my head. Psychology and behavioral health, I think is. And if Shashank is here, because I know he's coming, I apologize for butchering your title. So he is with VPUE for 3 years to work on academic well-being. It's not just student focused. It's also focused on faculty. How to help faculty recognize when there are signs of concern for students in the class, and how faculty can do some of the things I've been talking about, sort of connect with students, just so a student knows that if things are getting overwhelming, there's someone they can go talk to.
Thank you.
So I'm very excited to see what's going to come out of that.
Yeah, so I can follow up, Mary, if that's okay. We at CRLT at Michigan are involved more and more with different campus-wide or university-wide committees. There are folks thinking right now about student success and well-being in a really collective way that probably feels most urgent now. There's also another committee on the future of grading and talking to schools and colleges, especially those that have had the tradition of forced curves, and we know that that's not helpful pedagogically, and it's not also helpful for students' sense of their effort and what they're learning. And so those things are happening. I'll say that we talked yesterday through Ivy Plus quite a bit about the feeling of overwhelm that's on our campuses generally, and so I think that the well-being piece is really important, not just for the students, but for the faculty as well. And the silver lining, or one of the silver linings of the pandemic, I believe, is that it has forced us to think, like, what is essentially what I want my students to know and show? Like, what's the essence? Because I think that there was always an additive approach, right, to content generally. And so thinking about and that shift has been something that we've helped our faculty with quite a bit. And that also attends to the faculty overwhelm and the student overwhelm, and really thinking about how to be engaged in purposeful design, I think adds to that. I'll give a couple of small examples at the course level. We've We've done a lot around sense of belonging, especially in STEM courses that we partner with, but also sense of belonging at the University of Michigan for first-gen students, transfer students. And so there's a lot of our efforts go to brainstorming in this course. How could we share all what all the possibilities out there, especially for students who don't necessarily see themselves in kind of the mainstream student population, right? And so we've created kind of video archives of folks talking about my bio story, like this is how I got here, and these are the cool things I'm doing in biology that are not like being a biology professor, and showing kind of what's the diversity of the field and what can be done, but also from folks with really rich backgrounds and who speak candidly about how hard it was for them to feel like they belonged in a particular discipline. And so that kind of candor really, students have responded well to that with those kinds of activities. Another thing that we have done is developed a wellness survey for the very large courses. That wellness survey is a Google form. It's not anything super fancy, but what it does is it allows faculty to do a wellness check and say, we've helped them develop it, so it's part of it is about the content of the course, but part of it does ask about food insecurity, housing insecurity, and it connects students to the right places. By asking them, are you experiencing food insecurity? Are you experiencing housing insecurity? Our population at the University of Michigan is a widely wealthy student population, but it is not everyone. So that's a really important piece as well. And then also, would you like a wellness coach? Have you felt overwhelmed? Have you felt these things? Would you like a wellness coach to reach out to you? And so then it puts it on us. But that allows us to kind of triage it to the right places without it becoming another overwhelm for the faculty to then, anyone with a heart reading what students are going through, you're going to feel a certain thing, but we now have partnerships across campus in place that allow students to get the support they need in a way that it doesn't fall to the faculty to now try to make connections for them. So it's evolved quite nicely. That being shared in an academic course, in a very rigorous course, taking time out, a few minutes to do that wellness survey, communicates volumes to students about that the faculty do care what's happening to them, that they do want to support them, even if it's a 1,000-person class, that there's a way for you to kind of share what you're going through with the faculty, and it's about the content again, but other extenuating circumstances. We know that there's this big divide. I talked about this with some colleagues yesterday. This artificial divide between this is the academic side of the house, and then student life happens over there. And so by bridging that, it's just more organic in how students live, right? And we help them see that being excellent also means caring for yourself and understanding what you need and kind of surviving and thriving. So that's been another effort that's been really well received. We've been able to do that in STEM courses, but also in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, but also in nursing, in a few other schools and colleges. And so we're now balancing capacity of all the places on campus that would help them and these things. But it's an approach that's been well received, but also helped build trust and connection between faculty and the large populations they serve in a given class.
So Sarah and Denise, I think, have talked about students and faculty. I then just quickly want to add staff as an important part of this picture as well. Rebecca Pope-Lork has a really nice book about her work called Unraveling Faculty Burnout. And she has been traveling to many campuses to give this program and also to advise provosts and presidents about thinking about this issue. And so I invited her to talk with Sheridan staff. Certainly, I've heard this narrative that people were feeling burned out, and it was something that I need to be attuned to as leader of an organization. One of the things that she did in her session was we did a quick validated inventory of questions about signs of burnout. and then in aggregate, she displayed them to us. What was so interesting to me is that people were all over the map. Some were highly engaged. They were in it and feeling like they were thriving.
I think the mic's off a little off.
Oh, thank you. Is this better? Okay. And then certainly others were self-reporting symptoms of what this inventory would say was burnout. And so that was really helpful to me to say it's not sort of the static narrative of everybody's burned out in the same way, but there are nuances here. And so what I was able to do at that time is sort of shift some of my budget to supporting people one-on-one to things like one-on-one coaching. And then eventually our university-wide HR has subscribed to a service that provides not only access to therapy, but also coaching, recognizing that people, staff, are in different places and thinking about in their condition of overwhelm or burnout. So I just thought that individualized approach that was signaled to me through that exercise was very helpful.
Thank you, Mary. So seeing the time and wanting to hear
From the audience, I'd like you to turn to your neighbor just for 30 seconds about something that you've heard that's interesting, that's worth following up on, that you'd like to learn more about. We'll just take 30 seconds per person, so about a minute. And then you can enter your questions into Poll Everywhere. And we also have runners in the audience with microphones. If you don't have a chance to do that, you didn't bring your device, whatever the reason is. So it'll get loud for a minute, and then I'll do the quiet coyote so that everyone knows to quiet down. And then we can take your questions. So go ahead, get started. All right, thank you so much, Quiet Coyoteers. So I had a funky iPad that was not working, so I was missing all the questions coming in. So thank you for all of these questions. We won't have a chance to get to all of them, as you might imagine. And I think there's a few that we can add some responses in the slides, especially ones that are specific to what's going on here at Stanford, like with the Curriculum Transformation Initiative, for example. And but we do have a question that I think relates to change, and that was something we wanted to highlight in the imperative report. So I just put this quote up here. If nothing else, as a teaser for you to go, if you already haven't had enough teasing, to download and read the report that suggests that we should go beyond the idea that diversifying the community of students, faculty, and staff will lead to equity and inclusion. Institutional structures need to change, and resources must be reallocated and difficult decisions made about what can no longer be done. So in the few minutes that remain, Mary suggested we respond to this question. And sorry, Mary, which was the question?
Well, I think it's essentially, what is a pathway to change?
Yes.
If these are some of the issues, how do we get there?
So if there's comments from conversations you've had on your campuses at Michigan or here at Stanford, Sarah, or at Brown, or among maybe responses from the Equity Excellence Imperative, you can comment on that briefly. We have just about 7 minutes.
So I'll maybe start with one thing that I have found really working in intriguing ways at Brown. In 2020, we started a program that we call START, the Seminar for Transformation Around Anti-Racist Teaching. And it brings together departmental action teams. Departmental action team is an idea that I took from Colorado State that again thinks about the power of intergenerational work. Each team has a chair or a faculty member, often a graduate student and an undergraduate. And so they are rooted in the department. If they're going to walk across the minefield, they know where those mines are. But we support those departmental action teams then in two ways. One is to redesign a foundational course around anti-racist teaching principles. But then the second thing that we do is ask them to pick a change project or the way that they will then talk about this work with their colleagues. And so in many ways, what we do is we introduce the idea from Adriana Kazar, who talks about this as a form of grassroots leadership that they are taking in the department. But also what we see is that this has developed powerful connections between faculty and students in DEI work in ways that sometimes, through the standard script of we're going to write a protest letter often people were feeling oppositional and opposed to each other, but in this way, they're collaboratively working together and establishing connections that, sort of circling back to our prior topic, I think also helps create conditions of well-being while promoting positive change.
Well, I'm sure that all my Stanford colleagues in the room won't be surprised when I say that change here is hard. We have very distributed responsibilities for everything, for teaching and learning, for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It's a hard job. I think that having strong statements from leaders about the importance of the work is key. And what I'm still trying to figure out, and I'll be completely honest with you, is how to help those faculty, staff, instructors who want to make change while they try to balance everything else they're trying to do. I'm just looking down the list of questions. There's a lot of questions about how to balance teaching with the requirements for tenure and promotion with faculty. That's a really hard question. I think my answer to it is, hopefully most faculty are going to have a very long career at Stanford. So you start small while you're focusing on tenure, focusing on your research. Start small, be ready to be part of the leadership when you're tenured. Just have conversations, try to create places for conversations. We do have to change the way we assess teaching and learning. Again, that's a long project. But I think it's hard to do anything without leaders, and I include myself here, messaging the importance of the work. One thing I'm also trying with the Leveling the Learning landscape is to recognize that resources are needed. So we brought some money in to try to help do this, because we don't want to set an expectation that people should just be doing this on top of everything else they're doing. But very hard problem.
Yeah, at the course level and at the initiative level, again, that MOU really work hard to carve out space. We can offer money, and we do, right? Funding every year for the 3 years, but money does not create time, right? And so you have to be able to have those hard conversations about what can give for faculty and advocate for them a little bit as they do this work. I have the benefit of working within an initiative. I know that is harder, but I think that one of the things that we've done is, in addition to saying this is the MOU, this is what you're signing, part of the MOU is saying, and you will include this in annual reports as a real contribution to DEI, right? So we kind of write it in there. Chairs and deans are incredibly busy. Most of the time it's an oversight, right? They don't think, and they have they're looking up here, and to see what individual faculty members are doing is sometimes really difficult. And so we write that into the MOU so that they know, yes, we expect you to, awards, annual reports, any kind of promotion pieces, this should be recognized, and we give them language, and that helps a little bit with that. But it is a big ship to turn, because we only have a certain scope of influence, right? We can't influence how the tenure process happens, but we can put elements in that help build a person's case for tenure, or help kind of round out a person's case for tenure with referencing some of the work that they've done with us at the center.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We just have 1 short minute left. So before we thank the panelists for sharing their expertise and experience with us, I'd like to encourage all of you to continue to engage with this question of engaging with ideas, well-being, and belonging, and share your ideas that you will take from this panel, from this conversation, how you will develop or sustain those ideas in your respective spaces on campus. So we're coming up on a break. If you are interested, I have activated the question in Poll Everywhere for you to add your ideas, and that's a way for you to add your commitment, but also for you to reflect on what you heard and how you will personally be acting on it. So with that, I'd like to thank the panelists. Thank you, Denise, Sarah, and Mary. It was so lovely to have you here and share your expertise and experience with us. Please join me in thanking the panel.